a child tells his mother something shocking about his stepfather. Then she hid under the bed. As the autumn sun began to sink beneath the horizon, casting warm hues across the small town, Emily sat in the cozy living room, her young son Ben beside her, his small fingers curled around a colorful book they'd been reading together. Since she had remarried, life had felt fuller, and she cherished these peaceful evenings. Her husband, Mark, had entered their lives at a time when she and Ben needed stability most. He'd seemed perfect, thoughtful, kind, and supportive, a much-needed balance to their little family. But that evening, as Emily watched Ben's innocent smile as he turned each page, something shifted. Out of nowhere, Ben closed the book, his eyes dimming with a strange, almost fearful look. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice so soft she had to lean closer to hear him. "Can I tell you a secret? About Mark?" Her heart skipped. Secrets from a child's mouth could mean anything, from funny stories to serious concerns. She gently touched his shoulder, giving him her full attention. "Of course, sweetheart. You can tell me anything," she assured him, brushing a hand through his hair. Ben hesitated, glancing toward the staircase that led upstairs, where Mark was working in his study. "Sometimes, when you're not home, he does things that scare me." His voice wavered, his innocent eyes clouded with something Emily couldn't quite place. Was it confusion, fear, or sadness? Her heart thumped. She forced a smile, though a chill prickled her skin. "What kinds of things, honey?" Ben bit his lip, looking down at his small, fidgeting hands. "He talks to himself, and says weird stuff about you and me. Like he's angry at us." Emily swallowed, forcing her breathing to stay calm. This must be a misunderstanding, she told herself, a simple child's perspective taken out of context. But beneath her calm exterior, her mind raced. She trusted Mark, but hearing this, doubt began to seed. "Ben," she whispered, her voice as soft as a feather, "did anything else happen?" Before he could answer, they heard footsteps descending the stairs. Mark was coming. Emily looked at Ben, her instincts guiding her. She gently placed her finger over her lips, signaling him to stay silent as they shared a fleeting, understanding glance. As Mark entered the room, Emily put on a casual smile. "Hey, hon, we were just finishing up story time." Mark smiled back, but as he looked between her and Ben, Emily caught something in his eyes, a fleeting, almost hidden look that sent another chill down her spine. It was then that Emily knew she had to get to the bottom of this, even if it meant hiding in the shadows of her own home to uncover the truth. In the days that followed, Emily found herself watching Mark with new eyes, noticing little things she hadn't before. They were subtle, small gestures, slight expressions that could easily be overlooked. But after Ben's words, each detail felt more intense. Sometimes, when Mark thought he was alone, he'd mutter under his breath, his eyes fixed on the floor, his brows furrowed as though wrestling with unseen frustrations. Emily had always known he was a reserved man, but now, his silence felt guarded, almost secretive. Could it be true? She wondered, remembering Ben's innocent face and the quiet fear in his voice. One rainy afternoon, Emily took Ben to visit her close friend Sarah, who'd known her since college. Sarah was warm, with a knack for understanding people, and over the years, she'd become like a sister. Emily hoped that a friend's perspective might help clear her mind. As they sat by the window with steaming mugs of tea, Emily hesitated, unsure of where to begin. Finally, she took a breath. "Sarah, do you ever think people can hide things about themselves, even from the people closest to them?" Sarah raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "Of course. Sometimes, people put on masks to hide pain or past experiences, even from the people they love." She paused, reading Emily's expression. "Are you talking about Mark?" Emily's silence was all the confirmation Sarah needed. "What happened?" Sarah pressed gently. Reluctantly, Emily recounted Ben's words, each sentence feeling heavier as she spoke. Sarah listened quietly, her gaze fixed on Emily's face, occasionally glancing at Ben, who was lost in a game nearby. When Emily finished, Sarah sighed, leaning back with a thoughtful expression. "It might be nothing," Sarah said softly. "But if Ben is feeling unsettled, that's worth paying attention to. Kids are perceptive in ways we don't always realize." Emily nodded, feeling both reassured and uncertain. The house had always been their safe space, and Mark, her source of support. The thought of that safety crumbling made her chest tighten. That evening, when they returned home, Emily tucked Ben into bed, lingering a little longer than usual. "Ben," she whispered, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Is there anything else about Mark that you want to tell me?" Ben's eyes flickered with that same look of confusion and fear. Sometimes he looks at me like he doesn't like me," he mumbled, clutching his blanket. "But I don't know why, Mommy." A protective instinct surged within her, but she swallowed it, patting his hand. "Don't worry, honey. I'm here. Always." Over the next week, Emily's observations grew. Mark's behavior would swing from caring and attentive to distant and, at times, brooding. When she'd bring up small things, he'd dismiss them, as if every question was a reminder of something he wanted to avoid. She felt a strange mix of love and fear, unsure which was more justified. Emily resolved to stay vigilant, deciding she would do whatever it took to keep her son safe, even if it meant testing her faith in Mark, the man she thought she knew. A tense silence hung over the house, subtle but present in every interaction. Emily observed Mark with renewed caution, watching his gestures and expressions closely, searching for signs that might confirm Ben's words. One night, as she folded laundry in the bedroom, she overheard faint voices downstairs. Mark and Ben were talking, their tones muffled but carrying a strange weight that made her heart race. She moved quietly to the top of the stairs, straining to catch what they were saying. Mark's voice was calm, but with a coolness she hadn't heard before. "Ben, sometimes it's better to think carefully before telling certain things to people, you know? They might misunderstand, and that could end up hurting someone." Emily's heart pounded at what sounded more like a warning than simple advice. She couldn't bear to listen any longer. Clearing her throat to announce her presence, she descended the stairs slowly, noting the look of relief on Ben's face as he saw her. "What are my two favorite boys talking about?" she asked, forcing a smile. Mark glanced at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "Oh, nothing much. We were just having a little chat about being careful with our words, right, Ben?" Ben nodded, but Emily noticed a hint of discomfort on his face. She felt a wave of protectiveness rise within her but held it back, torn between protecting her son and directly confronting Mark. That night, while Mark slept, Emily lay awake, replaying every detail and conversation in her mind. Something was wrong, but she had no proof, only Ben's fears and her growing intuition. The next morning, as they finished breakfast, Ben approached Emily, tugging on her shirt. "Mom, you believe me, don't you?" She knelt down to his level, taking his hands in hers. "Of course I do, sweetheart. I'll always believe you. We're in this together." Ben squeezed her hand, his gaze uncertain. "Sometimes, I feel scared. But I know you're here." Emily's heart ached, but she offered him a reassuring smile. "I am. Always." Later, after finishing breakfast, Emily decided it was time to confront Mark directly. She waited until Ben was occupied in his room, safely out of earshot, before approaching him in the kitchen. "Mark, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady. Mark looked at her, his gaze attentive but carrying something in his eyes that unsettled her. "Sure. What's on your mind?" Emily took a breath. "It's about Ben. He's been feeling uneasy around you." I need to understand what's going on so I can help my son. Mark looked surprised, but only for a moment, before his expression relaxed into a neutral look. Emily, I would never harm Ben. You know that. He's just a kid, maybe he's imagining things. Sometimes kids do that. Emily watched him closely, trying to see beyond the words. I just want to make sure he's safe. He's my priority, Mark. And I need to know if there's anything he might be misunderstanding or if something's actually happening. Mark sighed and took her hand. I get it, Emily. Really, I do. I know you want to protect him, and I want the best for both of you, too. We're a family. She wanted to believe him, but doubt lingered, stubborn as a shadow between them. And as he looked away, she caught a flicker of something cold in his eyes, a subtle trace she hadn't noticed before. A sense of danger wrapped around her, leaving her with more questions than answers as Mark turned away, effectively ending the conversation. In the following days, Emily's sense of unease deepened, fed by small, seemingly innocuous incidents. Once, when she came home earlier than expected, she found Ben in his room, quietly drawing, while Mark sat alone in the living room, staring out the window. His face was lost in a shadowed expression, his eyes distant. When he noticed her, he quickly composed himself, offering a strained smile. But that moment lingered in her mind, making her feel as though there was a hidden side to him she hadn't yet seen. As days passed, she confided more in her friend, Sarah, who became her steady support. Over coffee one morning, Sarah pressed Emily to consider Ben's perspective further. Kids sense things that adults sometimes ignore, Sarah pointed out, her voice gentle yet firm. Maybe Ben is seeing something about Mark that you're missing. Emily nodded, weighing her friend's words. Yet, she struggled with the possibility that the man who had brought stability to her life might have a darker side. But how could she confirm it without bringing unnecessary fear or accusations into their home? One night, as Emily was preparing dinner, Mark entered the kitchen, wrapping his arms around her in a gesture that, before, had always felt comforting. This time, however, she couldn't suppress the slight tension that crept over her. He must have sensed it because he loosened his grip and stepped back, observing her with a careful gaze. Is something wrong? He asked, his tone casual but with a trace of curiosity that seemed a bit too sharp. She hesitated, forcing a smile. No, just, a lot on my mind. Mark tilted his head, studying her face as though trying to read her hidden thoughts. Well, you know I'm here if you need to talk. The moment felt heavy, filled with words unspoken and questions she dared not ask. To ease the tension, she changed the topic, keeping their conversation light. But that night, as she lay awake, her thoughts kept circling back to Ben, to that strange look in Mark's eyes, and to the worry that gnawed at her heart. One evening, as Emily tucked Ben into bed, he looked up at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Mom, if something bad happened, would you be here with me? The question broke her heart. She held his hand tightly, nodding with fierce determination. Always, Ben. I'm here with you no matter what. Ben seemed to relax, but his question left Emily with an even stronger resolve. She knew she couldn't stay in the shadows, waiting for answers to come to her. She needed to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Days later, Emily decided to investigate, feeling the urgency to protect her son and dispel the lingering doubts that haunted her. She found herself searching through Mark's study, trying to make sense of his personal files and notes without drawing attention. It was during this search that she stumbled upon a photograph tucked away in a drawer, a picture of Mark with a woman and a child she didn't recognize. The woman looked strikingly similar to her, with dark hair and a kind smile, and the boy bore an uncanny resemblance to Ben. Her heart raced as she examined the photograph. Who were they? She wondered, feeling a sense of dread. She quickly placed the photo back where she found it, resolving to ask Mark about it, though the potential answers filled her with fear. Emily couldn't get the photograph out of her mind. That evening, she waited until Ben was asleep and confronted Mark in their bedroom, holding the photo in her hand. She took a steadying breath, her voice controlled as she asked, "Mark, who are these people?" Mark looked at the photograph, his face momentarily pale before he composed himself. "They're just old friends," he replied with a forced calmness, reaching for the photo. But Emily pulled it away, her instincts telling her that there was more to the story. "Friends? Mark, this woman looks just like me, and that boy, he looks like Ben. I need you to be honest with me." Mark's jaw tightened, his face shifting between frustration and resignation. After a pause, he spoke in a low voice, "All right, Emily. There's something I haven't told you. That woman in the photo, she's my ex-wife, and the boy is my son from my first marriage." Emily felt a wave of shock, but kept her gaze steady. "You told me you had no children." Mark looked away, his voice barely a whisper. They're gone now. My ex-wife and son died in an accident years ago. It's not something I talk about." A chill ran down Emily's spine as she absorbed his words. The revelation brought more questions than answers. Why had he kept this from her? And why hadn't he been truthful from the start? She took a deep breath. "Why didn't you tell me, Mark? I needed to know the truth. Ben needed to know." Mark's face hardened, and he took a step closer. "Because it's in the past, Emily. I didn't want it affecting us. What we have now is what matters." But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something he wasn't telling her. His answers seemed too rehearsed, too convenient, and the way he avoided her eyes only deepened her suspicions. She took a step back, her gaze unwavering. "Mark, if there's anything else, I need to know. For Ben's sake, if nothing else." Mark's expression softened for a moment, his frustration giving way to an almost pleading look. "Emily, please, let it go. I've moved on, and I want us to focus on our life together. Bringing up the past won't help any of us." Emily nodded slowly, not fully convinced but sensing his resistance. She knew she couldn't push him further without risking his anger. But deep down, she resolved to continue searching for answers, even if it meant uncovering truths she wasn't prepared for. In the following days, Mark's behavior grew more unpredictable. He was alternately attentive and distant, as if struggling with a storm inside himself. Emily watched him closely, noting every glance, every unspoken word, as she tried to understand the man she'd married. Ben, meanwhile, had grown quieter, his once bright demeanor shadowed by worry and confusion. One evening, as Mark worked late in his study, Emily found herself pacing the living room, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that, to protect Ben, she would need to confront whatever lay hidden beneath the surface of their lives. When she finally went to bed, Mark was still in his study, and a strange sense of calm settled over her. She had made a decision, to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. After confronting Mark about the photo and hearing his carefully crafted explanation, Emily felt no closer to the truth. While he'd spoken of loss and moving forward, something about his words had left her unsettled, as if he were still holding back. That night, as she lay beside him, unable to sleep, a resolve began to take shape. She knew she couldn't rest until she understood what Mark was hiding. The following evening, Mark informed her that he'd be working late in his study and shouldn't be disturbed. Emily took this as an opportunity. Once Ben was asleep, she crept toward the study, hoping for answers. But as she passed by their bedroom, something pulled her attention. The drawer where she had found the first photograph was slightly ajar, as if hastily closed. Curiosity, and fear, guided her hand as she slid the drawer open and noticed a second, smaller photograph tucked inside. She barely had time to glance at it, but the image was chilling, the same boy, but with a haunted, forlorn look, standing next to a gravestone. Emily's heart raced. Was there more to Mark's story than he'd admitted? Suddenly, footsteps echoed down the hallway. Mark was heading toward the bedroom. In a panic, Emily looked around for a place to hide. The bed was her only option, so she quickly slipped underneath, holding her breath as Mark entered. From her hiding spot, she could hear Mark's heavy breathing as he walked around the room. There was a tense silence, then the sound of him closing the drawer. Emily's pulse quickened as he sat down on the bed, murmuring under his breath in a tone laced with frustration. "Why can't she just leave it alone?" Mark muttered, as though talking to himself. "I've done everything to keep this hidden. I won't let her ruin it." Emily's mind raced. What was he hiding? And why was it so important to him? Just then, she heard the unmistakable sound of Mark dialing his phone. He spoke in a hushed voice, but the words were clear enough to send chills through her. "I thought you said this wouldn't be an issue. She's suspicious, and if she finds out what happened, I'll lose everything." The person on the other end responded, their voice muffled, but Emily caught fragments of Mark's replies. "No, she doesn't know." "But the boy," he paused, his voice dropping even lower. "Yes, I'll take care of it if I have to." Emily's hand covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. Her worst fears were materializing right before her. She couldn't stay hidden forever, yet the weight of what she'd overheard left her frozen in place. She lay still until Mark finally left the room, his footsteps retreating down the hallway. Once the house was silent, Emily emerged from under the bed, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew now that she had no choice but to protect Ben and find a way out of this web of secrets. Emily spent the next few days carefully planning her next steps. The knowledge she'd gained from her secret encounter had left her shaken but resolute. Her priority was Ben's safety, and each day that passed only strengthened her determination to break free from Mark's hidden grip. She began by gathering the essentials, discreetly packing a bag with clothes, important documents, and anything she and Ben would need to leave quickly if the moment called for it. To maintain appearances, she kept up their daily routines, hiding her fear behind smiles and small talk. But she could sense that Mark was growing wary, his glances becoming sharper, his questions more probing. He'd ask where she'd been or what she'd done, questions that seemed harmless on the surface but carried an edge that kept her constantly on guard. One afternoon, as Emily was picking Ben up from school, he turned to her in the car with an innocent but probing question. "Mom, if we had to go somewhere really far away, just us, would you be there to keep me safe?" Emily's heart twisted at the earnestness in his voice, and she reached over to squeeze his hand gently. "Always, Ben. I'll keep you safe no matter what." In that moment, she realized just how much he understood, how deeply he sensed the tension in their home. She felt a surge of resolve. She couldn't wait any longer. That night, once Ben was asleep, Emily sat alone in the living room, mapping out their escape. The next day, she took her plan a step further. She visited Sarah, her closest confidant, and shared her decision. Sarah listened, her expression a mixture of worry and determination. "You're doing the right thing, Emily," Sarah assured her. "But you'll need to be careful. He won't take this lightly." Emily nodded, knowing full well the risks. But she couldn't ignore the fear that gnawed at her every day, the suspicion that Mark's secrets were far darker than he'd admitted. She wouldn't gamble with Ben's safety, not after everything she'd uncovered. That evening, Emily quietly whispered to Ben before bed, "Tomorrow might be a little different, sweetheart. We're going to go on an adventure, just the two of us. But you have to keep it a secret until we're ready to go, okay?" Ben's eyes widened, a mixture of excitement and relief washing over him. "Okay, Mommy. I'll be ready." With her heart pounding, Emily spent the night finalizing the plan, steeling herself for what lay ahead. This was her turning point, a moment where she chose courage over fear, determined to face whatever consequences came her way. She wasn't just protecting her son, she was reclaiming their lives. The morning arrived cloaked in a quiet tension, and Emily's nerves were frayed as she made breakfast, her eyes flitting between Mark and the clock. She had planned every detail, but executing it required precision. Ben sat at the table, unusually quiet, glancing at her now and then, his small hand gripping the edge of the table as if to steady himself. Mark, meanwhile, was calm, almost too calm. He glanced at them, his gaze lingering on Emily for a moment longer than usual. "You seem on edge," he said with a slight smile, though his eyes held a trace of suspicion. Emily forced a laugh, keeping her tone light. "Just a busy day ahead, that's all. I promised Ben we'd visit some friends later, so I'm trying to get everything done." He nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Sounds nice. Let me know if you need help with anything." She could feel the weight of his stare, but she kept her expression relaxed, refusing to let her fears show. Once Mark left the room, she and Ben exchanged a look, a silent agreement that today was the day. After breakfast, she took Ben upstairs under the pretense of helping him pack for the trip she'd promised. In reality, she was ensuring that everything they needed was in place and preparing him for a quick exit. She gave him a reassuring smile, her voice barely a whisper. "Remember, Ben, we're going to be brave and stay quiet, just like we talked about." Ben nodded, his small hand slipping into hers. "I'm ready, Mom." But as they descended the stairs, Emily's heart sank. Standing at the foot of the staircase was Mark, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Going somewhere?" he asked, his tone mild, but Emily sensed the sharp edge behind it. Thinking quickly, she forced a laugh. "I was just taking Ben out for the day, like I mentioned earlier. I thought we could do something fun, maybe stop by Sarah's." Mark's smile was tight as he stepped closer, his gaze flicking between her and Ben. "You don't need to rush off. We hardly get any time together as a family." Emily's pulse quickened as she realized he wasn't going to let them go so easily. She needed to keep him calm, to avoid arousing any further suspicion until she could slip away. But as he led them back to the living room, an intense, unfamiliar chill settled over her. They sat in strained silence, Mark's eyes never leaving her. After what felt like an eternity, his phone rang, and he stepped out to answer it. Emily seized the opportunity, her heart pounding as she grabbed Ben's hand, motioning him toward the back door. But as she turned the handle, a sharp voice echoed from behind them. "Where do you think you're going?" Emily froze, turning to see Mark standing there, his face dark with anger. In that instant, she knew she had no choice but to face him head-on. She tightened her grip on Ben's hand, her own voice steady yet fierce. "Mark, we're leaving. I don't know what you're hiding, but I'm done pretending everything is fine." Mark's face twisted in frustration, his fists clenched. "You don't understand, Emily. I did what I had to do to protect us, to protect you. If you walk out that door, you'll be making a huge mistake." But Emily stood firm, her resolve unshaken. "I'll take my chances." As they stepped outside, Emily felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, a newfound strength rising within her. She had finally broken free, but she knew that Mark wouldn't let them go easily. And as she and Ben walked quickly down the driveway, she braced herself for whatever came next, knowing that she'd fight with everything she had to keep her son safe. As Emily and Ben hurried down the driveway, she could hear Mark's footsteps behind them, quick and unrelenting. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she didn't dare look back. The cool morning air bit against her skin, grounding her resolve. She tightened her grip on Ben's hand, whispering, "Keep going, don't stop." They reached the street, and just as they turned the corner, she heard Mark's voice, sharp and desperate. "Emily, come back. We can talk about this." Ignoring him, Emily pulled Ben along, her gaze scanning the empty street for any sign of help. But just as she began to feel a sliver of hope, Mark's voice grew closer, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. "Emily, stop. His tone was laced with frustration and something darker, something she'd never heard before. She turned, her eyes meeting his as he finally caught up, breathing heavily, his expression a volatile mixture of anger and fear. "Emily," he said, his voice low, almost pleading. "You don't know what you're doing. You're putting us all at risk. I told you, I did what I had to do to protect you and Ben." But her resolve only hardened. Protect us? By hiding the truth? By scaring Ben? She shook her head, her voice steady. "This isn't protection, Mark. It's control, and I'm done with it." For a moment, his face softened, as if he were about to give in, but then his expression twisted again. "You don't understand. You weren't supposed to find out. It's too late to change things now." Ben looked up at his mother, clinging tightly to her, his innocent eyes reflecting fear and confusion. "Mommy?" Emily's protective instinct surged, and she stood taller, her voice unwavering. "Ben and I are leaving, Mark. I don't care what you think you're protecting us from, we'll be safer on our own." Mark's face darkened, his hands clenching at his sides. "You're making a mistake, Emily. You'll regret this. Don't you realize how much I've sacrificed to keep us together?" She felt the sting of his words but held her ground, stepping back as he took a step forward. "Whatever you sacrificed, it was never for us. I won't let Ben live in fear, not because of you." In that moment, Mark's resolve crumbled, and he lowered his gaze, as if finally understanding that he'd lost her. His shoulders slumped, and the fight drained from his expression. For the first time, Emily saw something genuine, regret, perhaps even shame. She took a deep breath, keeping her focus on Ben, who looked at her with trust and relief. Without another word, she turned, leading him away from Mark, away from the life she thought she knew. And as they walked into the dawn, Emily felt a sense of freedom and strength she hadn't felt in years. Several days after leaving Mark, Emily and Ben had settled into a small, cozy apartment across town. The space was modest, but it held a warmth and safety that they hadn't felt in a long time. With Sarah's support, Emily had managed to set up a new life for them, embracing the fresh start she'd never thought possible. But the question of what Mark had been hiding still haunted her. She needed closure, answers that would help her finally let go of the fear that had gripped their lives. With Sarah's help, she began digging into Mark's past, piecing together fragments she'd gathered over time. One evening, after Ben was asleep, she uncovered an article buried in local archives. Her breath caught as she read the headline, "Local woman and son die under suspicious circumstances, husband under investigation." The man's name in the article was Mark, though he'd used a different surname, and the details mirrored the story he'd told her, but with a chilling twist. The article suggested that Mark had been under suspicion in the deaths of his wife and son, though he'd been cleared due to lack of evidence. Witnesses claimed he'd often been controlling, especially over his family, and that the couple had been seen arguing shortly before the incident. A chilling sense of déjà vu swept over Emily as she recognized the pattern, the strange behaviors, the need for control, the evasions whenever questions arose. Sarah sat with her, equally horrified as Emily revealed what she'd found. It became clear that Mark's need to protect her and Ben had been his twisted attempt to maintain control, perhaps fearing that history would repeat itself if she uncovered the truth. Emily shuddered, realizing how close she'd come to sharing the fate of his first family. With this final piece in place, Emily felt the last remnants of fear slip away, replaced by a renewed strength. She had broken free not only from Mark's hold but from a cycle that could have ended tragically. This discovery became the closure she needed, a reminder of her own courage in leaving and a testament to the safety she'd created for herself and Ben. Sitting by the window the next evening, Emily watched Ben play, his laughter a soothing balm against the memories. When he climbed into her lap, looking up with trusting eyes, she wrapped her arms around him, feeling the weight of their journey lift. "Mom, do you think we'll be okay here?" he asked, his voice innocent and full of hope. Emily smiled, her voice steady. "Yes, Ben. We're going to be more than okay." As the sunset painted the sky in warm hues, Emily knew she'd finally found peace, a life defined not by fear or control, but by freedom and the love she and Ben shared, a bond that no darkness could ever break. Months had passed, and life for Emily and Ben had blossomed in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Their new home, though small, was filled with laughter and warmth. Each day, Ben seemed to grow more confident, his spirit brightening as the shadows of their past faded. Emily, too, felt herself healing, her heart lighter, her steps surer. One Saturday morning, as they walked through a nearby park, Ben pointed to a tree covered in flowers. "Look, Mom. It's like we're blooming too," he said with a proud smile. Emily laughed, feeling the truth in his words. She knelt down, hugging him tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. We are." With every moment they spent together, she felt the peace and joy of their new beginning, a life defined by freedom, love, and a bond that no darkness could touch. She'd learned to trust herself and to protect the light she and Ben had found. As they walked into the sunlit path, Emily knew that they were not only safe, they were finally, truly home. Thank you for joining Emily and Ben on their journey of courage and resilience. Their story reminds us of the power we hold within ourselves to break free from fear and create our own peace. If their story inspired you, consider sharing it with others who may need a reminder that hope and strength can bloom even in the darkest times. What would you have done in Emily's place? We'd love to hear your reflections and thoughts below.